So welcome everybody. As announced last time, today we have the second lecture. We have a beautiful talk from Francesco Cara. We are in the middle of 3 talks. The last one will be next week. And so a few words on Francesco, that then he will introduce himself much better than I'm doing now. He is a very passionate thinker, teacher, and professional in the field of ecological design. He does projects, many projects, cultural projects, but not only cultural projects. He is part of the climate space group, and so he organizes events, and he's an activist in this field. And so he's part of the climate reality project, right, Francesco? Am I still doing right, saying right?
Absolutely, yes.
And so he is a teacher in different high universities or higher education institutions, where he teaches sustainability and so different things. And today we have the pleasure of hosting Francesco, that will tell us about this beautiful experience that was very recent, actually. And that is this story of elephants that for us is extremely fascinating. And so how elephants and humans can actually coexist and even interact in this planet, which is an incredible story that I'm really keen to listen. So Francesco, I would please, I give you the right to share so that you can start your presentation. Meanwhile, of course, if you want to say something more about you, we are welcome. You are welcome, and we are curious to hear.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Anna, for this invitation. What I'm going to do today is essentially share a line of inquiry that I started a little over 2 years ago. And this is the first time I share it. So I hope it will make sense and it will be relevant to your work.
We are happy to be the first. We are honored to be the first.
Well, maybe the first and the last. So we'll see how it goes. Essentially, I've been growing a little critical about eco-design as a way of trying to reduce as much as possible impacts from what we design on the environment around us, and environment meant in the broader sense, including people and the rest of the living world. And so this inquiry is part of this reflection about how we can go beyond that space that by now we know pretty well. Now let me look for my presentation. Is it okay? Can you see it?
Yes.
Good.
Perfect. Good. It works.
So essentially, the first concept I started from is the idea that actually our design practice is primarily anthropocentric, and I started exploring ways in which we could open up the space of design so that it can address dispositions, needs, and wants of people, as well as the rest of the living world around us. And why this is important, it's not just a speculation, it's important because we are, as an industrial civilization, as an industrial society, we are truly wrecking the living systems around us. So it's very important to get into a more radical position and really try to develop, design, build with the living world, the rest of the living world, not exclusively for us. So this is the starting point. In a sense, sort of to use a sort of provocative statement, many of us, and by many of us, I mean essentially the industrialized society, are at war with the rest of the living world. So sort of, how can we change our perspective, our positioning, and our way of working so that we can design, build, and live with the rest of the living world around us? So I hope the big question makes sense. I'm going to present to you a very specific case study which concerns coexistence between people and elephants in a large part of Sri Lanka, what is called the dry zone. So this talk will be partly a talk about geography, partly a talk about zoology, partly ecology, but very much an integration of all these elements. So the subtitle I gave to the talk is actually reflection, what it means to design for humans and other living beings. And there is only one part of this line of thinking that has been documented in an article to appear, I think, after the summer, in a book called Handbook of Service Design, Plural Perspectives and the Critical Contemporary Agenda at the Bloomsbury Press. And the chapter we wrote is titled More Than Human Service Design, and there is a conversation between me, Mark Brightman, an anthropologist, and Ralitza Diana Debra, a designer. And it's been a great opportunity to develop some of those ideas. So what I will do now is take you through different forms of relationship between humans and other living beings, and then we will focus on coexistence. But I didn't want to dive into coexistence straight away, but to take you through a few steps. So the first step, essentially, is to think of relationships between humans and other living beings in terms of commensalism. And at the bottom, you find a formal definition of commensalism, but essentially the way I represent and use it in my thinking is very much the idea of living beings as actors in a human service system. And the benefit goes mostly to the human side of the system, and that is in exchange of freedom, of sustenance, and eventually better living conditions for the living beings involved in the system. Now, in the biological literature, there is a really interesting example, which is the example of egrets and cattle. Essentially, egrets are a sort of small kind of heron. I'm sure you can picture them. They often sit on cattle or are close to cattle, and essentially they take advantage of the fact that when cattle moves and when cattle eats, there are insects and small vertebrates that come out, and so they can feed on those organisms that are that start moving when the cattle moves itself and eats. So essentially, we have a relationship with there is no harm on the part of the cattle, and there is all the benefit on the part of the egrets. Now, when we look at some big questions, like for instance, one of the phenomena related to the climate situation we're living, the new climate regime, is the wildfires, which are ever more numerous and distributed across our planet. So there is a wonderful resource which is the Global Forest Watch by the World Resource Institute. And this platform tracks all the fires and wildfires that take place on our planet. And here you see wildfires in the northern hemisphere at the level of the boreal forest of Canada, of Siberia, or Northern Europe. And then you have sort of fires happening more in the Mediterranean area and the Atlantic coast, for instance, the deadly fires of Portugal, as well as the deadly fires in Greece on the Mediterranean coast or in California. And then you have sort of, the equatorial area and the tropical forest fires, and you see how many of those fires have taken place over the past 20 years or so, especially in Central America, in the Amazons, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then in Indonesia and Malaysia and Borneo in particular. And then sort of when we go in the southern hemisphere, we had terrible fires, and this has become regular in Chile and Australia, as you know. Now, from a anthropocentric design perspective, the way we prevent those fires is by deploying a number of technologies. Some of them are pretty mechanical technologies. So we go into forests and we try to clear them of the undergrowth. We build buffers and fire breaks in the forest. We also use high technologies, and we develop sensor systems to detect early fires. We use satellite technologies to detect early fires. So we deploy a number of socio-technical systems which are pretty sophisticated. Now, the first solution where we see commensalism at work is by looking at the same problem and approaching it with a collaboration between other living beings, in this case sheep and goats, and the work with them to clear the undergrowth and reduce the risk of fires. Incidentally, goats and sheep also eat lichens that grow on plants and are very, very prone to sort of are very, very combustible. So essentially, we have a number of solutions being deployed, especially around the Mediterranean, where old practices of silvopasture are put to use to solve essentially the problem of preventing wildfires. The top examples come from Spain, and the bottom one comes from Sardinia. But the logic of it is essentially of creating a benefit primarily for human society, even though there is clearly a benefit for the ecosystem as a whole, while providing good living conditions to the animals involved. They are in shade when it's very hot. They are in an environment which is rich in food, and so sort of, it's a good balance. We have a similar approach happening more in the Anglo-Saxon world, which is sort of targeted grazing. And here is really about bringing the animal to graze in areas which are particularly critical. So these could be forested areas around human dwellings, could be, specific areas. And the concept is very, very similar, but sort of, there is more design in it, in taking the cattle to the specific locations, in keeping the cattle within that specific location, et cetera, et cetera. But you see sort of, all of those man-made artifacts put into play to prevent wildfires are now replaced by a new system, which is really sort of a collaborative system where other living beings play an absolutely critical role. The bottom is a very beautiful, if you had time, I think it's about 10 minutes, short film explaining how goats are used to regenerate the forest in Australia, in an area prone to wildfires. We have sort of these sort of approaches which have become more systematic. For instance, in the United States, where you have sheep lawn mowers services. The concept being the same, but the asymmetry also being quite clear. And then there is one of my favorite systems, which is built with wildlife, contrary to the domesticated animals that we saw in the previous examples. And this is essentially with beavers. And beavers, you know, had been, there were a very, very large population until about the 17th century. In North America, they counted over 200 million individuals. So very, very large population that over the years, around 200 or so years, went down to around 100,000. So it was truly wrecked, as I was saying earlier, as a species. Now, there is a return of the beaver because actually by building dams and creating ponds, and from those ponds by digging very thin and very long canals that draw the water to the pond and get deep into the forest, they are really making the forest much more resilient to wildfires. Keeping the humidity, keeping the water in the system much more. They also provide, obviously, a solution for drought issues because we have more reservoirs, and they create an ecosystem which is full of life, rich with life, from otters to fish, obviously, and many other species. Now, you see the logic, hopefully. So it's the logic of commensalism with benefits essentially on one side and some benefits on the other side, and eventually the possibility, like in the case of beavers, just to go about their life. Last year, I went to Iceland, to the island of Vigur, because I really wanted to experience something directly, which is this relationship that exists between people and wild animals, and this concerns eider ducks, essentially. And for the past 200 years, eider ducks have been protected in Iceland. Because essentially first they were hunted for eggs and meat, and then sort of, you know, eider down was discovered and appreciated more and more as a way to keep warm during the long Icelandic winters. And since then, eider down farms have developed in Iceland, as well as in some other countries, but particularly in Iceland. Here, the system works by creating an environment which is a very protective environment to eider downs, so that they come back to it to lay their eggs and to reproduce. On the right, you see a picture of these 4 ducklings on a nest, which is essentially made of eider down. And that is because eider down is so insulating and so warm that the ducks could not be able to transfer heat to the eggs with this layer of eider down. So essentially, they take the eider down from their body, and they create this wonderful nest for their little ones. And then sort of, you know, come before hatching or after hatching, farmers go around and collect this eider down, replacing it when the eggs haven't hatched yet with hay. So again, here we are in a commensalist relationship, but there is an interesting mutualist dimension. There is benefit also for the ducks in terms of protection. They are protected from predators, birds, as well as other land animals. Now we go into the second category, which is mutualism. And here the relationship is super interesting because essentially we have a relationship where there is benefit on both the sides. And as usual, sort of I put the way I think of it, and then a sort of a more formal definition at the bottom. But essentially, there is sort of humans and wildlife forming service systems together that have the ability to generate benefits for both. Now, an example is similar to the previous one, but this time oxpeckers, and for cattle, another kind of egrets, as we saw earlier, the cattle egrets. They essentially live on the back of these large wild animals and eat ticks and small insects and larvae and other parasites that live in the skin of those animals. So they clearly provide a major benefit to these large wild animals, and at the same time, they have abundant food and quality food for their needs. They like blood as well, these birds. So again, sort of you see a new configuration where there is really benefits on both the sides. Research on oxpeckers and rhinos or zebras shows also that oxpeckers have an additional benefit, that is they warn large mammals of the nearing of a potential threat, like a predator. So here we're getting into a much more interesting relationship, obviously, where there is a real contribution and participation and mutual adaptation of humans and wildlife. And there are some examples, not that many examples, but I find them absolutely spectacular. One example is around fishing mullet, and maybe some of you are aware of it. There are some really good videos around. So essentially here, we are in a situation where mullet, which is a fish that lives in warm waters, is a coastal fish, is of interest to both dolphins and fishers. And what happens is then when a school of mullet approaches the coast, then dolphins start agitating. They either dive deep, jump, anyway, signal to fishers who are waiting for those signals on the coast that a school of mullet is approaching. And then at that point, fishers get into the sea with their nets and starts capturing the mullets. Some of the mullets escape and then become a prey for dolphins. So you have this configuration. You had it in Brazil, and the picture comes from Laguna in Brazil, shallow waters. You see this sort of mutualist relationship in Mauritania, so in Western Africa. You see it in the Irrawaddy Delta in Myanmar, and you see it also in India. There is another form, similar form, fishing with orcas in Australia. And all of these are pretty well documented. At the bottom, you see a pretty low quality video, which is absolutely extraordinary, that tells of this sort of fishing in Mauritania, where when the communication with dolphins can be started by fishers themselves, that using a stick start hitting the water, the ocean water, making noise to attract dolphins and engage then in this collaborative form of fishing. Incidentally, the fact that in Brazil dolphins fish this way protects them from the risk of being caught in big nets more far out in the ocean. So there is research showing that dolphins living in these closer to the coast, near the shallow water where they feed, sometimes mullet fishing with fishers, actually live longer and are less exposed to this risk, which is really a deadly risk for dolphins. The second example I wanted to discuss with you is another extraordinary example that comes from the eastern part of Africa, from Tanzania down to Mozambique, and is the hunting of wild honey done as a form of collaboration between hunters and the honey birds. And this is, again, a form of collaboration that is mostly initiated by the birds themselves, that produced calls to let hunters that they have obviously seen in their vicinity that there is wild honey to fetch. And so sort of, with a constant exchange of sounds between the hunters and the birds, they go together to where the wild honey is. And at that point, the human hunters use their technique, like smoke, etc., to get rid of bees and get to the beehive, and sort of open the beehive up and fetch the harvest, the honey that they find in the beehive. Once they're finished, they leave bee wax, which is something that the honeybirds really appreciate a lot, as well as larvae and eggs in that space. So sort of, there is again a very, very nice case of mutualism. Incidentally, the sounds produced by birds and hunters vary depending on when is in terms of the geographical regions and the communities involved in this kind of hunting. We are talking here of people who are hunter-gatherers. So when I say hunters, they are hunters of animals as well as wild honey, as well as many other things in their environment. So I hope this sort of clarifies sort of these different kinds of relationships that, in my view, could be integrated in the systems we design, based obviously on a lot of study, a lot of observation, and a lot of experimentation. Now, I just break a second to see whether there are questions at this point. And I cannot see, so if you can just switch on your mic and ask your question, that would be the best, so I don't, I keep my full screen image.
I think we are all listening, very curious to see the next, because the premises were super interesting.
Good.
I don't know if there are questions. We don't see hands raised, so maybe.
Good. Just reassure me, does it make sense?
Yes, it absolutely makes sense.
Oh, good,
thank you.
Good. So now we get into the other topic, and sort of conceptually, you could think of commensalism as a form of coexistence, mutualism as a form of coexistence, and they certainly are. But the way I think of coexistence is a little different, in the sense that there are not necessarily any interaction. It's much more about going about one's respective life with human communities on the one hand and wildlife on the other, with as little friction as possible. And at the bottom, you find a more formal definition that comes from a really beautiful piece of work from the WWF, which is called A Future for All, the Need for Human-Wildlife Coexistence. And I really like, thinking of, coexistence as something where we really let everyone live the way they want, be them human species or other species and living beings. So to try to understand coexistence, I went to Sri Lanka and spent a little over 2 months in Sri Lanka between November and January. It was probably the best experience in my life, I confess. So why Sri Lanka? You will understand it in a minute. But essentially, there are areas where I think coexistence between human and elephants represent the ultimate case of coexistence. So I really wanted to understand how that works, and went there as a volunteer in a local organization that is working on mitigation of human-elephant conflict. So the other areas, just for your information, are essentially Namibia, where we have desert elephants, and then the Botswana, which is amazing, around the Okavango Delta. There are many more elephants than people, actually, in some parts, and a lot of work is happening there. And then Tanzania, unsurprisingly. But I went to Sri Lanka because the people I contacted there really welcomed me in a wonderful way. And so a few information about Sri Lanka. I'm sure many of you have been there or know about Sri Lanka, but we're really talking of the tip of the Indian subcontinent. We're talking of an island which is pear-shaped or avocado-shaped, and is very close to the equator. It's an island which has a very long history. It's been inhabited for around 100,000 years. It's an island that has gone through a very interesting period, which is called a hydraulic civilization, and you will understand why, around 2,300 years ago. And a very long period of incredible development. The cities there, and the culture and the religion and the techniques there were really quite extraordinary. And then went through a very long colonial period, first with Portuguese, then Dutch, and then for a long period the British Empire there. They reached independence in 1948, and went more recently through a terrible period of civil war between the Tamil population living on the north and east coast of Sri Lanka, a minority by far, and the Sinhalese and other ethnicities in Sri Lanka. A bloody war. About 80,000 people died during this war. And but now it's perfectly peaceful. So a good agreement was reached, and the situation is very peaceful. So we are talking about 20 million people, a very rapid demographic growth. The population doubled between 1960 and 2020. A population which is growing of late. It was very large before, in the 19th century. It was very large. It went down to a few thousand, and now is of about 7,500 elephants. Here we are talking of Asian elephants, so they are smaller than African elephants, darker, smaller ears. Only 10% of male elephants, tuskers, have tusks, and tusks are much smaller than African elephants. So they didn't suffer from the monstrosities that happened in Africa because of poaching in the past. Now, as you can see from the map on the left, there are lots of blue dots. So Sri Lanka is a land of lakes. Most of them are artificial lakes, and they are part of this hydraulic civilization that I mentioned to you. The reason, the importance of water is that Sri Lanka has a very, very large dry zone, which covers the north and the east of the country. You see it from on the right map. The yellow part is the dry zone. There, the monsoons happen in November, December. In that period, all the water comes from those 2 months. For the rest of the year is extremely dry. So the solution that was developed over 2,000 years ago was to create tanks, create reservoirs, and use those reservoirs to have water and irrigation resources for the rest of the year. And this explains all those reservoirs. Now, the reason for this very split climate is because of mountains in the middle. So the mountains don't let the wet weather from the Indian Ocean going north from the south. So the south is very wet, and the opposite happens in November and December. So the mountains block the monsoons coming from the Bay of Bengal to go south of the mountains. So the mountains are at the center. Now, in terms of distribution of people, you see the map in the center. You see sort of there is Colombo, the capital city, where the concentration is very high. For the rest of the country, is only the tip, the north, where the population density is much lower. For the rest, is a quite densely populated country. Now, 1960, a big development project was developed. As we saw, the population was growing, so there was the need to produce more food for Sri Lanka to be self-sufficient, and there was a need to provide livelihoods to more and more people. So in the 1960s, a lot of research was started that led to the Mahaweli development program. The Mahaweli development program is captured, in the map on the left. Is a very large part of the country that has been transformed into cropland, primarily paddy fields. And to grow rice, you need a lot of water. So the Mahaweli River that you see, the Blue River, is the biggest river in Sri Lanka. It goes from the mountains in the center to the eastern coast of Sri Lanka. And the water comes from the Mahaweli River as well as from the rain seasons. So this meant that a lot of shrubland, a lot of forest was cut to create space for crops. And a lot of people were moved from other parts of Sri Lanka into that part that was sparsely populated in the past. So you see sort of, we have a dry zone, we have a major development project bringing water and irrigation capabilities to that area. And the second map shows the forest, a forested area still left in Sri Lanka, which was nearly all forested, before probably the tea plantations were introduced by the British Empire in the 18th century, 19th century. So you see sort of, in yellow-green are the national parks, the protected areas, and then the rest of the gray gives you a sense of where the forests are. Now, elephants are forest animals. They don't live at the heart of the forest, they live at the borders of the forest, but they are forest animals. So essentially, they need shelter in the forest, also because of the heat. Now, moving into the elephant world, this is a nice picture of elephants, the distribution of elephants in the country. In the left was 1960. You see sort of, probably 3/4 of Sri Lanka was land for elephants. A big important difference is the dark blue and the light blue. The light blue are male elephants, and we'll talk more about it. But for most of the year, 10 months in a year, male elephants wander around. And then during the reproduction period, they are with the elephant clans. So they have a much wider range than elephants groups. Now you see in 2015 there's been a significant reduction in that space in the areas where elephants roam, can be found. And then the third is a picture that shows the forested area in relation to where elephants are. And what I really wanted to show you is how much of Sri Lanka is really shared between people and elephants. You can consider that the green areas is where there is no people, because there is protected areas, so people for safaris, researchers, rangers, but very few people. And then the rest of the purple and blue areas is where elephants and people live together. Now, a few pictures just to make it more real. The quality of a picture is not so good. I didn't bring with me any camera because I wanted to be as light as possible, so it's my smartphone. But here is the situation. On the left, you see a dam, and you see a tank, and you see a clan of elephants bathing. And in general, fishermen are on that tank fishing. People go and bathe. People go and wash their clothes. On top of the dam is a road, and people go up and down that road to go from one village to another. There are buffaloes who go there to eat and drink and share the space with elephants. So to give you an idea. And the second one, here the picture is taken from a tree house. The first one was taken from a jeep, but the second one is from a tree house. So we were high in the tree house, monitoring the corridor that elephants use to move from a national park, which is north of where we are in that picture, to a water tank, which is the south. And they use that corridor. They go through this corridor, and this corridor is between two villages and crop fields and roads going through it. So again, this to give you an idea what it means to live with elephants. There was an accident recently, but we'll talk about accidents a little later. But I wanted to give you a sense of how shared the environment is. Elephants, during the day they are in the shade, they are in the forest, and then when sunset comes and at night they go around. And then a few pictures of male elephants roaming alone. The first one was an elephant in must that was chased from the first clan I showed you, who was bathing. There was another male there, and he was chased away. The second one is an elephant that appeared all of a sudden. He was in the water there in another small tank, and we were driving past on the road, and the elephant came out. And then the third one is something really funny. A big elephant that was walking very slowly. We followed the elephant, and here he's taking a nap against the tree. Elephants sleep very little, about 4 hours per day. Now, let's talk about where coexistence is problematic. And this is a map of accidents happened in Sri Lanka over a period of time between 2019 and 2021. You see where elephants are not present, there is no conflict. This is a truism. Where population density is much higher, there are much less conflict. Conflict is very much concentrated in those areas where people do agriculture live in these sparsely habitated areas with patches of forest left where elephants live, along corridors connecting one forested area with another forested area. So there is where conflicts happen. And sorry for the gory pictures, but I think it's important to see sort of, how it looks. So some of the elephants are killed by jaw bombs, and these jaw bombs are food packed with explosives, and they're laid around essentially for wild boar primarily, but elephants eat them as well, and the result is really dramatic. Then sort of, you have electrocution. As we will see very shortly, there are lots of electric fences, and some people, to make the electric fences much more effective, connect them to the mains, to the electric network, to the electric grid, and this makes for electrocution. And it's absolutely crazy. So this is the picture of the elephant on the right, and many people die as well during that operation, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly dangerous. And then there are accidents, elephants and cars, but especially elephants and trains. And very recently in February, there was a big shock with 7 elephants dead, and a train derailed. Poisoning with jaw bombs, gunshots. I put some numbers from a very recent census. So we're talking, in the past 10 years of about 3,500 elephants killed, and human death about a little over 1,000, because people are killed by elephants. They just pick them up with their trunk and throw them out, and then tramp on them, or simply trampling on them. So this is very crude. It's really, really terrible. Now, faced with that, sort of, there's lots of things to learn, and here is really design research. The first thing that I found absolutely fascinating is going back in time, over 1,000 years ago, in this what is called in Sinhalese Elangawa. And Elangawa is a series of tanks all connected to each other, with forests, with paddy fields, with villages, with a number of things that create one of the best ecological systems we know of. And some of the, it's incredibly sophisticated. I don't have the time to get into the detail, but, around 2,300 years ago, we were capable of designing landscapes where people and elephants and other wildlife could coexist truly peacefully. One of the solutions was to have a tank that was a tank dedicated to wildlife, so people would not use it. Another thing was to leave a band of paddy fields, between paddy fields and the forest, with rice or other products that were not harvested, so that animals would find some food there, without having to get into the paddy fields or into the village, as well as many, many other things. And this is really inspirational. Now, this is a picture of one of those irrigation systems and paddy fields. The paddies, the rice has been, it's very, very fresh. This was mid-December, was taken in mid-December. And you see sort of very extended network of canals. Here, this is one of the rare fences left with the stones. And the idea here was to use stones because elephants don't jump very high, as you can imagine. They are between 3,000 and 5,000 kilos weight. Even though they're super fast, they run very fast, over 60 kilometers per hour. They walk very fast, nearly 7 kilometers per hour, but they don't jump very high. When they try to get over those fences, the stones fall down, and it becomes very difficult for them to walk. So this is one solution. But the most common solution are electric fences. And initially, when the Malawi project I mentioned to you was designed, the idea was to move all the elephants in the national parks, in the protected areas, and then put the fences where corridors were, so that elephants would not leave the protected areas. And this didn't work, as you can imagine, and we'll see a few pictures. So the association, the organism I worked with in Sri Lanka, which is called Wildlife, Sri Lanka SWCLS, Sri Lanka Wildlife Conservation Society, CS, sorry. So essentially, they developed a different concept, that of putting fences around villages and cropland instead of trying to fence animals out, fence human communities in. And the system is very simple. You see the poles, the cable, and then you see a little where the energy comes from, a solar panel with a minimal equipment, a battery, and what it needs to make AC into DC. This is a very simple system, and some of the work we did was to monitor those fences. And very often, elephants who would see food for them on the other side of the fence would simply, with the trunk, push the pole down, or use some branches or some other tree to take it down. Here I put a picture of one such case. The grass on the left is called manna and is the favorite food for elephants. It's wild grass. Here the cultivation had not started yet. And then here on the right, you see the traces of an elephant that went through the fence and ate a banana tree, because they really like bananas, but they also like the inside of a banana tree. And then more pictures. There you see papaya trees protected by this fence. It's not a very resistant protection. It's considered to be functional around 50%. And then another fence that here is really going along the forest. Here, when possible, instead of poles, is trees that are used to support the cables. Now, here is another case, this is a coconut tree that was fell down by an elephant that went across the fence. And on the right is a kind of environment you find. So very small farms practicing, a wonderful form of agriculture, mixing everything there. You see the from banana trees, you see pepper, you see papayas, you have corn, it's really beautiful. It's mostly subsistence farming, but it's really beautiful. So the forest, in a sense, becomes a food forest, but you have the similar density to the forest. Now, some other solutions. So one of the projects I went to visit, which works on the restoration of cascade tank villages, the Elangawa I was mentioning earlier, uses mobile electric fences. So it is during the rice season that the fence is put up. After harvesting, the fence is removed so that elephant can go in the field and eat what is left. And they really like shrubs, and they really like, fresh vegetation after harvesting. So very mobile system managed by the village. Is not an individual choice. It's a resource managed at the village level. And here is, unfortunately, don't remember his name, but he was the head of the farmer society of this village near Habanara in central Sri Lanka. And he was very much at the heart of all this innovation. And you have a look at the simplicity of the system that is used, the inverter, the battery, the controls to operate the system. Now, the fence is electrified only between sunset and sunrise during the night. Now, I couldn't take a picture myself, so this image comes from a project in India, but another solution to address the issue of smashing the poles down is to have sort of hanging fences. So nothing is, the distance between the poles is much larger. And this apparently is working very, very well. Moving on, what I found very interesting, and this is something that we did with the society, the Sri Lanka Wildlife Conservation Society, now I pronounce it properly, is to use natural barriers made of citrus trees, because elephants don't like them. So here you see a very minimal electric fence, and behind the growing trees, which are a hybrid between lime and orange, a very, very strong smell, that are used as the fence. When they will be high enough, the electric fence will be replaced. And this is a win-win situation because it's a source of revenue for farmers there. Another option used in other parts of Sri Lanka is to use palmyra. And palmyra is a very, very hard kind of palm tree, produces dates, so elephants can find food in them on the one side, and on the other, dates will be harvested by people. So another of those solutions. Now, this is a very poor picture, but all of a sudden, someone passed a aliwedi. Alia is the name of elephant in Sinhalese, and this is a firecracker to scare elephants away when they come. So this is more in conflict solution. So you are with elephants in your land or in your village, and this is what the government distributes to farmers in conflict zones so as to help them move the elephants away. It's about 25 centimeters long, about 5 centimeters diameter. The other solution is tree houses, guard houses. And here I've taken this picture from top. These where the person on the right, Ajit, is the project manager of this beautiful rehabilitation project. And I was about 9 meters high, and you had this view on the rice field. Here is a little further out, so the rice is grown more, and it gives you a visibility all around. And people during the growing season spend all their nights there, and they have torches, and they have things that make noise to scare the elephants away, as well as the firecrackers I showed to you earlier. So this is a state in conflict defense. Now I'm finishing here. There are many more things to say, but I really wanted to talk you through give you an overview of all the solutions that can be designed to create environments, landscape, territories where people can coexist with wildlife. Now, a few more things that I just wanted to mention in words. So when it comes to pre-conflict, as you saw with the Malawi project, there was little consideration for wildlife. So the idea was to create a lot of room. It's nearly 25% of Sri Lanka for growing crops, for agriculture, for the needs of people, and land use is really sort of where the key decision is made. Shall we share this land, or shall we use this land for our only for our purposes? The second thing is, once you have done it, elephants are they have very stable behaviors. So they move from one forest to another, from one little forest left to another one, using the same corridors. So it's utmost importance to keep those corridors free for them to use and roam without using them for agriculture, without building houses, without building tanks, without building roads, without having train lines going through them. So corridor protection is really of utmost importance. The elephants have used those corridors for generations and generations and generations. Now, what is really important also is to consider crop selection. So if I've got a piece of land which is really next to a corridor or next to a forest where elephants go regularly, and they cover per day, they cover around between 40 and 50 kilometers per day, because they eat a lot and they need food. They eat everything that's available in an area and they move to another area, and again, they eat what is available there. They eat 150 kilos of grass per day, grass, leaves, and bark, and fruits. So, crop selection is very important. Let's not put things that elephants love next to where they go by. Let's put, sesame. Let's put oranges. Let's put garlic and onions and, things that smell strong. And I forgot the others, and let's not put bananas and papayas and corn and rice that they really adore. Now, the other thing that is done with great difficulty is tracking, so as to know exactly what are the corridors that elephants use to roam around, and then sort of map those and have signpost and take all the protections to let the elephant roam freely in those areas, so the mapping function. Then when we are in conflict, there is one case which I didn't manage to document properly, but many people say, some of us talk to elephants, calm them down and tell them that they will leave food for them after the harvest. And this seems super soft, but there is a beautiful documentary that tells a very similar story with chimpanzees in Guinea. Extraordinary. People talking to chimpanzees and telling them, don't worry, we'll leave some of the crops for you. So sort of, it's incredible, hard to believe, but I had these stories told to me several times. And then sort of there's everything that can be done post-conflict, and this is very much policy making. So it's about compensation. And today, sort of, if someone has been killed by an elephant, the family receives about $2,500, 1 million Sri Lankan rupees, around that sum of money. Less money if a harvest had been lost or the house had been lost, but there are compensation mechanisms. And then there is capture and relocation, which is essentially the idea of when you find a male elephant, which is a serial, it's a problem, then this elephant is captured and is relocated in sanctuaries. And if you're interested, we can talk more about sanctuaries. Essentially, the capture and relocation was used during the Malawi project I mentioned to you. So hundreds of elephants were put in the national park, and most of them went back from where they were taken. So I've been a little long, but I really wanted to cover as much as possible. A last thing, I wanted to thank you and also leave my email in case you want more information. And I leave you with a picture of the last observation in the corridor we did from a tree house in a very rainy day. And as you see, elephants are always together. They stick together. They are wonderful animals, really wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca, super interesting. And I don't know if there are questions. In case, raise your hands or open your camera so that we can see you. Agatha, thank you for this inspiring presentation. So,
really good. What's the purpose? What's the purpose? Because sort of, we are providing you insights before the wonderful summer break you will have. in a few weeks.
It's a pity that you won't be able to be with us in Como. So we can try to make another occasion maybe in the future.
I'm deep into a new project, so for this reason, Anne invited me. I would have loved to be with you.
Okay, so I see many people saying thanks. If there are questions, please tell us. Otherwise, I have just one that is probably about the future. So once you have done this beautiful experience and seen a while, you entered in this incredible world that is unknown to all of us, of course. How you see to continue this collaboration? How you see to, if given the case, of course, to collaborate or to contribute to this creation of a peaceful environment? What will be the future?
So essentially, what my objective is to do what I've done today. So really share this way of thinking, this experience, and demonstrate that it is possible. to design for more than human beings. Okay, and I think it's very important, sort of, to have a message of possibility and to start exploring this. Now, in terms of practice, one needs to be very, very humble because the complexity of those environments is absolutely incredible. The people I met are very competent. They practice without knowing in any formal way different kinds of participatory design. They work in a multidisciplinary way. So it's really difficult to get involved as a full actor in those projects. I'm too old to do that, but if I were younger, I would really go and work there for a prolonged period of time, because time is of essence here. You can come up with things which are very superficial very quickly, and you really need to immerse into the complexity of those ecosystems. I hope I managed to give you a glimpse of the complexity, but sort of, you had a policy level, you had a cultural level, you had an economic level, you had this purely ecological level, and the complexity is something that, frankly, I was not used to, even though in my professional life, I found myself in very complex situations, but this is a totally different degree.
There is a hand raised. Cesare?
Yes, hello. I have one question. Is the knowledge about elephants shared through just through the people, just through the stories, or is it also covered in some literature or books?
So what I find really interesting is that, you have many kinds of literature. So you have a lot of zoological type literature about elephants, about their behavior, about their physiology, about their social life, about the ecology, where they live and how they interact with their environment. So you have lots of literature there. You have lots of literature about human-elephant conflict, and it's a literature which is more of a economic, socio-political nature. So what I'm saying is that you have relatively little synthetic literature, okay? There are some books which are amazing, and I'll take down your name, or if you can drop me a line. There is a beautiful book on African elephants written by a zoologist, and she starts from her scientific research and then gets into policy, and is super, super interesting. So I hope I've answered your question. So there is a lot of research. What I find is missing, and I've tried to do it in my own really simple way, is to bring these things together, because what we're missing is the full picture with the animals, the human society, the environment where it happens, the institutions of that country where this interaction occurs, the technology. So this is a more difficult picture to build. I hope I've answered.
Yeah, this answered my question. It just it's such a complex and new knowledge for me, and it's just interesting how this knowledge is passed.
Yeah.
And this is something really local, really specific for this place. So yeah, I was wondering if people just read about it in books, or just go to library, for example, and read about the relations between elephants or something like that.
So to me, sort of, you saw the picture. Ajit was the person with a brown shirt that I pictured from the treehouse. So he is a person at the center of a very broad network, working with the Ministry of Conservation of Wildlife Conservation of Sri Lanka, working with the Ministry of Irrigation in Sri Lanka, working with universities in Sri Lanka, working with the World Bank for funding, working with, you see, sort of, so I really was amazing meeting him, because he was at the center of that network. And what, in my view, we need to practice this kind of design is really to build those networks with new profiles, with new competencies, with new perspectives.
Thank you.
Anyway, for those of you coming for the field visits, you will visit also the beautiful new exhibition in Triennale Museum, which is called Inequalities. And there is also a beautiful installation by Boomserm Prentada, who is the architect that I showed you the last time, designing for elephants and humans. And so there is a beautiful shelter and for elephants, which I think is very, very interesting. So, by the way, I have this that was a gift, and I love elephants, so I think this is perfect for the case. So, guys,
there was one question about the presentation.
Sorry,
so I think that the presentation, this was recorded, and I will certainly share the presentation with you, Anna, if it's okay. I'll send you.
Sure. We'll distribute it as soon as you send us the stuff. I remind you that we meet the next week for the last online lecture.
There's another question.
Oh, Elena has a question.
There is another question. I think it was about the availability of the presentation, no? Elena. Elena.
Oh, is you Elena? No, it's not.
Elena. She has no longer the hand raised, so I think it was about that. So I remind you next week, May 28th, and we will talk about this. Show you a bit, so just a quick reminder, let's say. So we are going to talk about urban conflict mapping with Stefano Maffei and Laura Cipriani. This is to conclude, because after this lecture, we will actually see in presence. And so very soon, we will all be around a beautiful table in a beautiful location. So thank you all. Thank you, Francesco. Very, very interesting and very emotional presentation also. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you. And please get in touch if you have other questions. All the best.
Sure they will.
All the best with the school.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.